So anyway, let's get on to the good stuff, which is our Web3 and music panel for today. So I'll start off by just introducing our panelists, and then we'll have a little chat about where we're heading on this conversation, and then we're going to get into the good stuff. All right, so from left to right, starting with Isaac McFarlane, Hahko at the far end there, and then we've got Alex, and he also is Pohewa, DJ, Phil Williams, who is one of the co-founders and chief design officer at Old Estate Machine, and then we've got Nicole Upchurch as well, who's GM of CENNZnet and also a big part of the Centrality family. So that's the quick intro, but I'm just going to get everyone to just say a couple of words about themselves, what their background is, and what they're currently working on, and their interest in Web3, and then we're going to have a little chat about all good things on that front. So, Isaac, you draw the short straw. Go.
Starting with me. Thanks for coming here, making me feel at home being like further back than the front, which is usually how New Zealand gigs go, so that's nice, feeling comfortable. Thanks to Jonah for having me. Yeah, I operate under the name Hahko, and I'm basically an opinionated loudmouth, basically, about whatever I find interesting at the time. I do a whole lot of things which allows me the privilege of kind of saying what I think about a whole lot of things and it not blowing up in my face every day. I dove in. I also make music. I've been making music for a long time, putting on gigs for a long time. I have a podcast where I interview musicians and music industry people, which is where I met Jonah. I got into, full disclosure, I don't own any, I'm not in crypto, I don't own any crypto, I don't have any investments in crypto or anything, but I did do a really big deep dive into it around the time it kind of hit the consciousness around the Beeple sale, and really got into Web3, NFTs and DAOs, and just from the point of view of an artist, which is where I come from all the time, which is how can we empower artists to build sustainable, or start building sustainable careers for themselves and build sustainable audiences so that they don't feel like they need certain parts of the industry. They can interact with them if they want to. And so it was always interesting to look at that stuff, and I have lots of thoughts about it, and I'm interested to hear from people in real life who are involved in it as opposed to American talking heads on YouTube. So, yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Alex.
Tēnā tātou, a whakalohi atu. My name's Alexanda Whitcombe. He ria hau, te ati hau nui a Paparangi, rao ko Nairobi ki tahi, Rotuma, Ngāti Pākehā, me le kepa oku iwi. My name's Alex. I'm a consultant focusing on intergenerational social change projects. I also lecture AET around design and innovation part-time, dabbling a little bit in the Web3 space, NFTs, more of an enthusiast of the area, and also DJ under the name of Pohewa. So quite a full circle moment really, coming back into the space journey with Neck of the Woods. DJ at the launch party of Eager Beaver's NFT project, and I used to work out of this space, co-space, 10 years ago. So be able to come back on the panel and connect with the team here has been great. So for me, I guess the opportunity that I'm focusing on is how to support more Māori and our Pacific peoples to move into that space of being drivers of change. So moving out of the victims of change to drivers of change. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Alex. And now we're moving into the two people on the panel who are what we would say deep in Web3, and probably just a little bit of context as well. So a lot of what we've been talking about over the last couple of days is about the music tech cluster that is centered around the K Road area with Serato and Melodics and in music. But we've actually got another tech cluster which has just recently moved into the hood, and that is the Centrality Web3 ecosystem, who have just moved into a new building this week actually. So they are now our new neighbours in the K Road area as well. And so we've got this really interesting intersection of two very interesting kind of technology clusters coming together. And so we have Phil and Nicole with us, and Phil, just maybe give us a bit of background on yourself.
Thanks, mate. Well, yeah, we've just moved into new premises in South Street, but I don't feel like I ever left. I've had a long association with K Road, and in fact, Jonah and I were first in this space when we took the lease on it as business partners in Biz Dojo many years ago. So interesting journey, and I've got a lot of love for Neck of the Woods and all the things that we have jointly done here, and all the things that it's continued to do over its long life. Kia ora, I'm Phil Williams. So I'm a designer, a strategist, and a music aficionado. I've had a very long 20-year history with electronic music in New Zealand, going back to being a collaborator at The Gathering, one of the first great New Zealand dance festivals, a DJ and a promoter down the years, huge passion for electronic music. The technology part of my life, I've had a lot of different roles in the technology space, primarily as a designer, and moving on into strategy roles, but most recently the last 5 years has been in the crypto space, largely within the Centrality group of companies with Nicole and many other fellow travellers, and we have worked on a number of ventures there together, and the one that I work on now is called Altered State Machine. It's an NFT company and NFT-based company, and what we do is we do AI technology for Web3. So essentially, the technology at the core of our business is a patent around attaching an AI machine learning model to an NFT, and what that enables us to do is have open ownership of smart agents, AI agents, in this open web future that we're imagining. So trying to really create a platform which is AI for everybody. So big dream, but we're having a crack at it right here in New Zealand.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Phil. And Nicole, lucky last.
So my name's Nicole Upchurch. I am the CEO of a public layer 1 blockchain called CENNZnet. I feel like I'm the official nerdy person on the panel. But luckily for you, I'm not actually a developer, I'm not an engineer, I'm a marketing person. So I'm going to give you the nerdy story, but I'm going to take you on the journey and let you know about blockchain. A lot of people are now gravitating towards NFTs, Web3, because it's really come into its own. There's starting to become some really good use cases for it and within music. But I think before you can go down that route, you need to understand the fundamentals of blockchain and what it represents, because it's really important. So the concepts of decentralization and ownership in particular, you don't need to know what a Byzantine fault tolerance is. There's no sharding in this conversation, but understanding what decentralization represents and how you can participate more and take ownership, I think are really good principles.
Yeah, awesome. And that's actually a really good kind of jumping off point for probably the first part of the conversation, I think. So maybe a little bit of personal context from me, actually, and why I started to get interested in the Web3 kind of a space as well. And I've talked about this with Isaac on his podcast recently, but actually, the pandemic has had obviously a big impact on all of us, and particularly in the music industry. The music ecosystem has been really fragile following everything. We've been closed for long, extended periods of time, suffered some, tremendous financial challenges. And one of the things I was looking at as a venue owner while we were shut down for very long stretches of time over the last 2 years is how can we be more resilient? How can we be a little more, stand up to some of these kind of shocks that come externally for us, and what are the different models that we could maybe do as a music venue, wearing my venue owner's hat, that can kind of help us navigate things a little bit more sustainably in the future. And so I was kind of really interested in starting to drift into the Web3 stuff around different types of community ownership, shared participation, all of these kinds of things. So I think the principles of Web3, when you hear them at a top level, sound really awesome. This idea of decentralization, of creators taking a greater ownership on what they're creating and being rewarded more fairly for it, removing middlemen, all of these kinds of things sound great, but there seems to be this barrier, I think, to some people in terms of how do you engage, how do you get in there, how do you shake out some of what is hype versus what is actually real, and how do you engage? And I think in the music space in particular, we're on a spectrum where there's a lot of people who are quite technically savvy and are jumping in boots and all and getting involved in it, and then there's people in the music space who are a little bit more hesitant and a little bit unsure, and you see stories of NFT projects that have gone south and rug pulls and kind of a lot of stuff that feels very speculative, and then a whole lot of technical jargon around blockchain and NFTs, and everything is a 3-letter acronym or a 4-5-letter acronym. And so how do people get engaged, and how do we kind of, I think that's a really good starting off point. So even describing Web3 would be a really good way to kind of kick us off. I read something a while ago that said Web 1 was all about reading. So, it was websites.
Read only.
Read only, yep. It was just about read only. So it was you could read a website, but you couldn't create any content that would be included on it. Web 2 was all about you could write, which was like Facebook and all of the, Twitter and everything else, and all the social media platforms. You could create content, but you didn't own it. And then they were then describing Web 3 as ownership, shared ownership, and you could have more control. So probably starting with Phil and Nicole, does that feel like a good description? Is that the way to kind of, and how would you describe Web3 to people who are trying to get involved?
I think the important thing here is the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 and why it happened. So I like to pick on Facebook, because who doesn't like to pick on Facebook? But when you think about the idea of centralization, you would create this profile on Facebook, and you might nurture that, and you put your profile and what you like in there, and your images and your events and whatever you have, and you think, well, that's my profile. I crafted that. But it's not actually your profile. It's kind of owned by Facebook, because at any point in time, they can decide, actually, we're changing the rules around it now. We're going to update the terms and conditions, and if you don't like it, well, that's kind of too bad, because it's our platform and we've made those changes. And I think there's a lot of people, especially when you start to realise that a company like Facebook actually takes a lot of that information that you've freely given to them and monetises it through data-driven advertising. They're making billions of dollars off information that you're sharing on this platform, and in exchange you get to see what your friend had for lunch yesterday. So it's about an exchange of value, and I think slowly people were starting to understand that there wasn't a good exchange of value within that, and that they were giving a lot, but maybe not getting what they deserved in return. And that's that Web 2 read-write, that read content. So you're adding your own content. And now they're deciding, actually, the move to Web 3 is around, I own my own information. I own my own data. I want to be in charge and have a say on how that's used, whether someone can use it and what for. And I think that's where the transition into this new world of ownership and decentralisation really started from.
Yeah, that's perfect summary. Nothing more to add, yeah.
And so for someone, so say Alex, in your situation as a DJ as well, and someone who's been involved with an NFT project, what is it that's brought you into that? How did you get involved? What was it attracted you? How did you overcome some of these, it can be quite opaque to people coming in fresh to it, and quite intimidating, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting space. Like, I think most people get introduced through, obviously, influencers on social media. They start, pumping out these campaigns and saying, get involved. And so you kind of get hooked in, but at some point you have to make a decision around, do you invest? Do you turn your fiat coin into a cryptocurrency of some kind? And then getting behind a project and understanding the ins and outs. So I think for me, originally, I saw this new wave coming. I didn't know what the wave was called, what its functionality was. Being a part of a few projects, getting into things like the Discord and figuring out this is online community, that's craziness, and people are hyping it up and people are grinding away, spending hours trying to get what they call a whitelist to then be able to be considered to buy NFT. So all of these things like new language in the digital world that I guess our communities are starting to experience. But I think for me, what really hooks me into it is, like we're talking about, decentralizing the platform. And when I think about it, really at the core for me, like getting involved in an NFT project is about what it means to me in an identity way. So I think an analogy for, I guess, Web2, like we would probably go buy a Mercedes car because that identity we associate with, but that depreciates. But with the NFT, you're grabbing onto an identity that could increase in value or depreciate in value, but you're also, for me, it's also like you're giving access or membership into a project, you're being surrounded by a community. And so I think all these other emotive things are attached to it rather than just the coin. So I think that's what I'm seeing, how I see people responding to it in the community. They're obviously getting involved in turning their value of skill and art and really translating that into value for them as an artist. And I guess from a DJ's perspective, I don't know, being paid in crypto or being paid in NFTs is a really interesting concept as well. Like, I'm not too sure what that means to me, like in terms of value-wise. And also, I guess obviously as time goes, you'll see the fruits of what that project might mean. So it's quite an interesting section.
Yeah, I might just try and pick up on something that Alex has said there about value of community, because really value, as we go into this Web3 space where ownership is at the base, value is, what is value is really important, and what creates value is attention. That's the same as, any part of life or anything in the world, we value the things that we put our attention on. So really what we're seeing in Web3 NFT communities particularly, and it's quite nascent, is the raw power of attention to drive value. And they drive value in this instance in digital assets, but for musicians and artists, they've always had their value driven and raised by the attention of their fan bases. And that's actually where there's a really interesting evolution to happen here around. It's already happened a bit for these visual artists. Beeple is the easiest example, but there are thousands of others where they have the value of the attention that their community brings has already increased the value of their works. Well, that's one lever, and the other is that they've been exposed to a new pool of capital which already existed in crypto. And I think it's important to recognise that second part as well, because these artists may actually have previously had a following, but it wasn't until they had access to a new pool of capital that they were able to receive better value for their work. And that transition has happened for some visual artists, and it needs to mature more. And I think I'll just deliberately ignore the hype cycles and the rug pulls and all of the sort of growing pains of this space, and look forward a little bit to the more mature future. But it really hasn't got there yet for musician artists, and that's because the sort of the individual, well, it's just for the simple reason that a song is a thing that you purchase many times, a song is a thing that is made once and it's heard many times, and you don't own an edition of a song in the same way that you would an edition of a painting, or not yet. And this lies, and in here lies an interesting thing to unpick, which is that the tools that Web3 give us with NFTs are different ways to address ownership and different licensing models. So you can imagine at the moment there are very limited licensing models for music. And the two predominant ones are, an old school format like buying a record on, let's say vinyl. If you're a vinyl collector, that lives permanently in the world, and that can be transferred from you to another person. So that's a physical ownership. Or this, now an all-you-can-eat Spotify stream. And those are two types of license to the artist's creative output that exist at the other end of the spectrum. And what we can do with NFT technologies is we can actually devise many different types of licenses that sit between those and test those out. And we might actually find that, limited time licenses work better, or that, certain number of play licenses work better. We don't know what will work, but these are new tools that we might put out there into the space.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it, because I think I think one of the things I've always struggled with when I've kind of been looking at this space and trying to learn a bit about it is I was trying to get my head around, well, there's a lot of overlap, right, as well. So you have a lot of conversations about, people talk about cryptocurrency, and then they kind of intermingle it with conversations about NFTs, and then they're talking about, speculating on increasing asset values in these new types of, digital assets, but then they're also talking about them actually being more about community ownership and being part of a tribe and being a fan who's supporting your favourite artist, and it gets a little bit too intermingled, I think, and that's one of the things, as someone who's external to that industry, I've found quite challenging to unpick. And I think, Isaac, you and I talked a bit about that, It's trying to figure out what's...
I totally remember what we talked about. Yeah. Yeah. We did talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I have to say that every time that I've spoken a few times recently, and you'll turn up to something like this and they'll be like, so we want to hear about Web3 and crypto and blockchain and NFTs and something else, and I'm like, we could be here for days. Like, we could actually be here for days. The reason that you gravitate towards NFTs, and I think Web3 at the moment, is because it's very, very trendy. But before we go on, it would just be quite good to take the temperature of the room. Does everyone know what an NFT is? Okay, great. So we're not start, because I went to something the other day and the lady was like, "What's a block?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, right." we're almost -5 of where we need to start. So NFTs for me, even though there is a lot of cool use cases for them, we saw the Beeple 69 million, that brought the hype. A lot of artists are using it as an alternative revenue stream, and that's amazing because that's really helpful. We're definitely showing the progress into the Web3 space, but I think bringing it back to some of the things that you can do that resonate with mainstream consumers might be a good place just to quickly put some ground down. For example, I see Andy in the audience. Andy's team have created this kind of ticketing app where instead of getting a ticket as an email that someone would send to you, you can actually get it as an NFT, which shows ownership because it sits in your wallet. Now, if I buy this NFT and I'm going to an All Blacks game, let's say, because I'm so sporty, and I decide I can't go anymore, not sporty anymore, and I decide to sell it to someone, because of the transparency, you will see the ticket move from this wallet to your wallet if you buy it. Now, in today, and I imagine in this music scene probably even more so, if you send out an electronic ticket with a QR code on it and someone sells it to 10 different people and they all turn up at the door and say, "Hey, scan me in," and they say, "No, that ticket's already been used," that's actually a really good use case for mainstream people about how having an NFT ticketing system is an excellent example of where it could add value to your lives. But the great thing is, for these people, it doesn't show up as anything different. You don't have to log into a new thing. It's the same as any app that you would get for a ticket that you get now, right? So it's just bringing in now. The music is a really interesting one, and it's something we've gone through an art phase. We're definitely building up in the Web3. There are some cool use cases for mainstream stuff. But that music is just starting to, people are exploring it a lot more and working out, everything from I'm releasing my album as an NFT, or, I'm doing a concert and I'm doing NFT. Shay Fu was releasing his anniversary album a little while ago, and they approached us to see if they could create it as an NFT, but then it would have other layers underneath it. So if you bought the album as an NFT, it might also give you access to early ticket sales. It might also give you access to merchandise or discounted prices or other things. So I think with NFTs, like finding a way to do it so that you can present it to a normal person and they don't understand it, they don't worry about the difference, and also doing it so it has utility within it. We talk about utility a lot in our industry. It can't just be a picture anymore. It's not enough. It's got to be something that represents membership or additional value or other layers underneath it that you get as well.
Yeah, awesome. No, I like that. I mean, utilities come up a lot in conversations as well. So, Alex, just with like Eager Beavers, do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? And that's obviously a NFT project you've been involved with. You were at the launch with Sons of Zion, and what's behind that? How does that incorporate some of this utility that Nicole's talking about? How does that work in terms of a music project?
Yeah, so Eager Beavers is a NFT-based project, and it's got like a really strong New Zealand presence of artists, icons like Stan Walker, Kings, Sons of Zion. So they've really brought their clout to the project, and I think that's quite a core critical component that when you're like looking at a project to understand their roadmap around where they would like to go, but also who's behind it. And so I think that allows people to build trust with such a foreign object as an NFT. So that was probably the first part, but what we're talking about utilities is often you can mint an NFT, which is to buy and translate that into your wallet, and it can come with additional features like access to VIP or merchandise, or you might receive cryptocurrency. So you're buying into a membership, you're receiving additional benefits, and it kind of drives the user to get involved and to receive extra benefits. So those are the tangible ones. But also, I think it's the community that you surround yourself with, who you rub shoulders with, like the launch party, meeting Shefu for the first time, like pretty incredible, like the community that you connect with. So I think a project like Eager Beavers is quite different to, say, like Trillionaire Thugs, for those who know that project, like very hype-based. And speaking to the founders and understanding the drivers behind Eager Beavers is around collective wisdom and actually helping everyone kind of transition through the Web3 space. They weren't looking to sell out. They still haven't sold out. There's not their driver. My understanding, they haven't had many resales or if any, which is quite opposite direction of many projects. So to see people actually like invest their time and try to build an intentional community to take people through this, I don't know, this next wave of Web3. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And then again, entering into the launch party with your NFT ticket that's been airdropped to you. So it's similar to a membership in some ways. It's not too far disconnected to how we go to a normal like blues game. You have to download a ticket on your phone. Some people are still printing that. It's just like one step further than around engagement. So I think we're quite close to having more of this in our reality.
Yeah, nice one. And just listening to you all talking then, that does help frame things up a little bit for me in particular. I kind of go, okay, cool, I can start to get my head around some of this, digital collectibles that are kind of a badge for a fan who's wanting to support their artist, with utility added into it, with some specific kind of other touch points and building this community. All of that stuff, I feel like that starts to really kind of connect, and I can get my head around the potential of that and things like the ticketing one that you talked about, Nicole. But I guess, Isaac, I just wanted to check in with you because you did do that deep dive a while back into Web3, coming very much from that kind of music perspective and not tech at all, not involved in the Web3 space, but really trying to understand what was there. We're listening to everyone talking here. What do you see, the opportunities, and maybe because you haven't invested in any kind of Web3 NFTs or crypto or anything. So where are you at? What's your mindset around that at the moment? And listening to what everyone's saying here.
Man, I've got lots of thoughts. Okay, where to start? I suppose I should say I'm very open-minded about everything you guys are talking about, and you can either choose to believe me when I say that or not. But it's true. And I think that everything we can do to help young artists be in control of the direction their career goes in so that they can suit it to themselves more is a really good thing. In in saying that, it sounds kind of like the financialization of everything to me. And we're talking about things like community. We're talking about trust. We're talking about a lot of things. And I think one thing to say is that I think it would really help the conversations with you guys moving forwards is there is two separate conversations, I think. One is what Web3 is now. And now we're talking about that. And then what we think Web3 is going to be, where you can kind of have your ideas of where you want to go. Because I think there's a lot to be said. I've heard a lot about what Web3 could be, and it does sound okay. Right now, I would say that the analogy that seems to fit what I'm seeing right now is Web 1 was like read only, Web 2 you're the product, and Web 3 you're the victim. I don't mean that to say that's what it's gonna be. That's what I mean. Like, I actually think there is a lot of potential moving forwards, and to say something positive about it, I think the potential is in the idea that maybe we'll have some either new ideas or we will be able to use the lure, the shiny technology to make sexy again some very old ideas. I.e., essentially, when we talked, we kind of got to a point where we're like, maybe this could be some kind of sneaky digital communism. You know? People think about communism now as like the workers in the factory and Marx and all these things, and they don't see that reflected in the world around them. They don't see like communal ownership. At every point we're kind of ostracized and distanced from one another. And it would be great if this kind of technology could find a way to, I think at its best is when it promotes the community to actually come together and connect people who actually have a shared vision to actually share risk or share the goals. I do worry about that coming through a financialized thing, right? Because all you need is a majority of people who are actually speculating on your thing. And you're gonna run into problems whether straight away or down the line. I think it can create a environment where the most important thing to me, say like, who's here had the idea of 1,000 true fans? Yeah, right. So it's like the idea that if you can, all you need is 1,000 people to spend $100 on you a year, and you've got a decent pool of living. And you know there are millions of people in Auckland. You know you could find 1,000 people knocking on doors if the shit you're doing is good enough. You know, I worry about artists getting in now or being convinced to get in, really burning those initial audience people who are taking the most risk coming onto your project, your creative work early on, when you're trying to grow, which is the point of this. We're trying to use Web3 and NFTs to grow. I would worry, especially with what's happening to the market right now. Again, it's that conversation of now versus future. But I think that's a big problem that needs to be addressed. Is how do you actually guarantee to the people you're convincing to come into your community that they are going to get something out of it? And then when they say that sounds like just a membership club, do we have to bolt a blockchain onto this? What's the answer to that? I think that's the most pressing. If I was trying to onboard people onto a project right now, those would be the two big questions that I would have my answers ready for the people coming on. Yeah.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, Isaac.
It's very emotional.
So sneaky digital communism, that rings a bell with me. That's a good direction of travel, actually. So, you know, first of all, just on the financialization of everything, we only financialise what we allow to be financialised. Having the tools to financialise something doesn't mean that we will do it. It means we have the choice to do it. And there are certain things that will never be financialised, like the most important relationships in our lives. And there are other things that should be financialised, like a car lease, that maybe some people don't have access to. So having the tools doesn't necessarily mean that everything becomes a decentralised financial asset. But financialisation by stealth of things that shouldn't necessarily be financialised, which is kind of what you're getting at when you say our community is going to get ripped off, that is a problem. And that is that's an information asymmetry problem. And we have a big information asymmetry problem in Web3 at the moment. It's very early days. There are a lot of interesting foundational technologies that allow you to attach a thing to a store of value, an NFT. And much the way that 10 or 15 years ago, no one's mum knew how to set up an iPhone. At the moment, most people don't know how to set up a MetaMask wallet. They don't understand the foundations underneath it. So it's very, very easy for people in the technology community who are less ethical to set a bunch of stuff up and, set up a system that might not necessarily be designed to defraud anyone, but is not well designed enough to be future-proof and not well designed enough to protect the communities that it's supposed to serve. So missing information, nascent technology, there's a lot to solve there. It's not not something that we can solve overnight, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep looking at the foundational technologies and the way that they can serve what we already do. And I think one of the best ways to guard against the concern that you have about, an artist rushing out into Web3 technology and kind of bringing their whole community with them and that going badly, is to say, let's start small. How do we bring a piece of Web3 technology into the space that we already know? So it might be that the musician just tries out releasing a certain EP in a different way with one of those different rights licenses, and not going the whole hog and putting their whole career onto the blockchain, their entire past catalogue, essentially burning their bridge and creating a lot of obligations for the future that they might not be able to meet. Instead, start small, work with a technologist that you trust, try something out, and we can be sure that in 2 to 3 years it's going to have evolved in a positive direction.
I just reiterating there, it is early. It's super early. Like, this is the very start. This is the hardcore hockey stick, innovation, make things happen, ideation, whatever. And so I wouldn't expect anyone from this session to jump up and say, right, Web3, immerse me, I'm in. But it's really important for you to stay on top of these new changes. This is just a conversation so that you walk away and go, actually, I'm going to keep looking at that because I can see that it's still early, but in 12 months' time, I don't want to be left off either. So just keeping and doing your own research. There'll be other musicians that maybe do some bold steps over the next 12 to 18 months. I almost guarantee it, actually. And just keeping on top of how they perform, how it's received. Have they opened themselves up to new communities and audiences and fans by doing this thing? And I think that's where you want to go, same as the artwork. They've just given themselves a brand new digital revenue model instead of like physical paintings. And it's a mental mind shift. But I tell you what, there's a lot of Web3 fans out there that are hardcore, like crazily hardcore, very passionate about this space, and that is growing. We are seeing the growth of that. It's still a fraction compared to maybe some other audiences, but it is growing in a big way.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on a point there to connect it back to what Isaac said. I think that's really important. It's not necessarily about grabbing Web3 wholesale and selling it to your existing community. It's about bringing new Web3 based communities into your artistic community as well, because that's a big opportunity. So and maybe that's the best place for artists to dabble in this early stage, is to say, well, what can I do that would appeal to existing NFT fans or crypto fans, rather than trying to bolt on a crypto product for my the people who turn up to my gigs anyway.
Just to add to that too, just the idea of dabbling in that space and creating an extra platform that allows you to extend your user base but also be potential revenue. I think, like, if you go back and think about when SoundCloud started, their golden era of 2012, 2013, when their electronic trap music was coming out, Mr. Carmack and other artists now, and you got Selection as big fan bases in that style of music. People were just extending themselves and applying them to another platform. Then you start moving to things like Twitch, in the lockdown, gaming and music did that go, and now it's created its own platform and it's become a sustained revenue for some artists. So the idea of going from SoundCloud to Bandcamp to Twitch, like, NFTs is not too distant future from the reality. So if you just split part of your focus and your attention to try dabble in that space, I think you would reap the rewards. I've thought about it, putting out an edit pack as an NFT and see how it's received. I might not have the following, but it's just an experiment.
I think that's a good philosophy, right? Experimenting sounds like that's the right way, and maybe that's the right way we need to. If you're a musician or an artist talking to your community, you need to be talking about it that way with them, that you're doing something that's maybe an experiment where they should be managing the risk that they're taking on board to be a part of that journey with you, right? And they're doing it in a considered way and realizing this is a experiment that you're doing with the artist to try this new stuff, see if there's new ways to create value for both artists and fans, I guess. And it's not speculating, to Isaac's point about financialization. It's not turning something into some speculative asset that you think you're going to buy this NFT and you're buying it because you're going to get 1,000% return on it in 2 months or something.
No, and you can be specific about territories of use. Like if you want to dabble in Web3 as an artist, then what you don't want to do is go wrapping everything up in that. You might just say, well, actually, I'm going to work with this technology or this technology provider on the basis that my artistic output will be used in metaverse spaces or Web3 spaces for a set time, so you're constraining it, and we're actually doing commercial deals like that for massive global brands, where we're just taking the metaverse Web3 slice. So what that does for the brand, and in this it just directly translates to artist, is that the brand is protecting itself with its regular output, its regular commercials. Nothing changes for them in that space, but they're adding on to what they're doing.
I've got a question for you, Phil. The smart, when you're saying, like, when you're talking about licenses and you're talking about controlling that, it's operated through this. Are you talking about the smart contracts operating that?
Typically,
yeah. Are you interested, or like, what do you think about the discussion around smart contracts and how legally binding and all the legal stuff that goes into it? Like, I know in America there's an interesting thing about
real simple answer to that. The smart contract is not the law of the land. The smart contract is a piece of operative technology that is an if-then statement. It says that if I pay you this, then X will happen, or if this thing that can happen in the technology space, some trigger that I can look at, it rolls over to a Wednesday, then this will happen. So if it can be codified in software, then it is the smart contract. A smart contract is only as good as the law that underpins it. So that still comes back to the law of the land. So to give an example, if you wanted a smart contract to encode the rights to a particular piece of hit music over time, you absolutely could do that, but the smart contract itself would need to refer to the legal document and then have the other stuff over top of it. It's an addition to, and a useful one. It's not a replacement for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a different delivery mechanism for the copyright legal system we have now, right?
Yeah, but very importantly, it gives automation over the top of that, and that shouldn't be underestimated, because that opens up a world of possibilities for music rights and management.
Yep. Interesting.
Okay, cool. Just keeping an eye on the time, but I guess probably one way to just kind of start to wind this panel down before we move on to the next session, is really interested, because we could talk all day about this. This is a deep topic, right? You can go in a lot of different directions. But what would be your advice from each of you for someone who's looking to kind of put a toe into the space and try and learn about it and start exploring it in a way that manages, not speculating, not kind of going out and necessarily buying a whole lot of crypto and hoping it's going to, do massively well overnight. But what would be the way, especially from a music context, if you're someone who's interested in music, you're either an artist or a fan, what would be a good way to engage, or what are examples of people and or projects that are doing it really well? And I'll give one to start off. I think for the audience, a lot of people would know Mark de Clive-Lowe, as a musician. Yep, he's based overseas now, but he's been doing some really interesting stuff with his back catalogue, where he's had projects where he's raised money to buy back the rights to his music, and then he's released them on Catalog, which is a music NFT kind of site, and he's done a lot in the community with Masih beats and this kind of thing. He's made quite a lot of revenue himself, but he's done it in a very measured way, where he's, to your point about slicing off and experimenting and protecting your community, to Isaac's point, he's done it in a really good way. And I think he's a really good example of a musician who's been finding his way in Web3 well and bringing his community along with him and bringing new people on board as well, to your point about crypto people. But so I guess that's the general question. How would you get involved if you're interested, and or what are the examples that you would say of people doing it well, or projects?
So I'm going to give an example which I don't think is probably what you were thinking, but Twitter. Who knew Twitter was still active? I thought it was completely dead before I came into the crypto space, but crypto Twitter is hot. And there are plenty of music artists expressing themselves through, we call it crypto Twitter because that's basically who uses Twitter now. I would, if you have a Twitter account, just sign up to that, because the new, fresh, cool announcements of things that people are doing specifically with music are coming through there. For example, Steve Aoki is doing Aokiverse, and Mike Shinoda did an NFT with us a while ago. It's not just electronic music either, it's across the whole range, but if you want to stay across the latest stuff, Twitter's a really good place to start.
A lot of hype in Twitter. Love it though. It's like trying to drink from the fire hose every day. Where was I going with this? Twitter. Oh yeah. So projects to watch. Check out what our sister project Fluff are doing with music. They're doing some interesting things. Keep an eye out. And watch out for celebs and musicians who own a Bored Ape and talk about it a lot and give them the big X. It's usually a sign that they're on the wrong track. I'm being a bit mean to Bored Apes. But do watch out for hype. And more importantly, ask the artists that you're connected with, the ones that you care about, what they think about the NFT and Web3 space and what they're doing in it. Because that will give you there are so many subcultures in the music scenes that we know and love, and if you can ask them what they're doing and get down to how that particular community is feeling and what projects they're following, then that's going to give you a better gauge than just going, from the top down and choosing the biggest musician with the biggest name. Have a look at what the people you care about are doing.
To add to that, I think a really easy entry point is just identifying a music project through your circles and see what people are following. But just enter the Discord. Just get into the Discord platform, get a sense of how people are communicating, how the project is run, understand the roadmap. So again, like what they intend to do with the funds that they raise. Get a sense of how the community is talking. You get a real quick sense of if it's a hype project or if they're in it for the long term. And just going back to like selection, like what they've been doing with the music movement from SoundCloud, they've created a Discord for fans, providing utilities. And so I think if you've got something you're already associated to music-wise, try to see if they've got an extension in the NFT space. But I think just going back to the Eager Beavers project, I think it's quite a powerful platform. From day one when I joined Discord, I saw just the culture that they set. So I think, again, not a hype culture. And I think it really relates to, say, for Māori, for example, like when you set the tikanga of a space, the technology is just a platform, but how you utilize that technology is quite important. So seeing like Wellness Wednesday channels being set up, promote your business. So you're starting to like see the reciprocity in that community, and I think it's really interesting. So I think if you can get in touch with a Discord channel would be great. If you can invest in an NFT, you're almost working away at seeing how the crypto market fluctuates and moves, but you're also understanding how that kind of infrastructure works from a community perspective. And then you can kind of see, well, am I into to flip projects? Am I into to sell? Am I just here to understand how Web3 is evolving? So it depends on how you want to enter, but as a musician, I think it's a great opportunity to, I guess, extend and experiment with your offering in that space.
Yes, I would say to someone that I would say, like, I would agree with the experimenting thing, potentially. I guess my thing would be you can actually experiment with all the ideas we've talked about today without a blockchain involved. And I only say that because I think as we talk about our examples, we're actually talking about established bands or some of the biggest bands in the world. And the thing that really brings out to me, and you're going to hang around after this as well. Well, I hope you all are. I'd like to, let's do this for 2 hours. But I'd really love to hear it specifically from you. This idea of experimenting isn't free. And what we're actually talking about is a system, regardless of all the bonkers climate discussion and all that stuff, ETH costs money. When you transfer ETH, it costs money and gas. When you do all these things, there isn't a low bar of entry into this thing, not only in terms of information, but also in terms of money. And it does seem like a hard time right now when rent is so high, when living costs are so high, when musicians who are already struggling to create or finish or build anything, and I am talking about growing artists and younger artists, of course, to take some of that precious time to experiment in something with the precious money they have, and also to convince people who they're trying to build an audience with to do the same, is a very, very high ask in this climate. So I would say I agree to keep an eye on it, and I think there are some interesting artist-led projects which I would be, if anyone's interested, I've got a few that I actually do really like, that are, again, if I was having to involve myself in with, I'd probably go for one of those. Frank Jukes being one. I don't know if anyone knows Frank Jukes in here. He runs the Kingsway sample sessions and is essentially recreates the vibe of old samples for people like Kanye to use and stuff like that. That's an interesting project. He's got one of that. I can talk about that. But yeah, I think there is a whole
Frank Jukes.
Yeah. There's a whole conversation around the entry level for communities into this thing. So I would say try the ideas. You can build a community. You can have a club. You can do all these things. Yes, people could pretend to be a member of your 5-people club.
Ouch!
But in the future, yes, there are.
I like my 5-people club.
Yeah,
Isaac, I'll just lay down a friendly challenge to that. It's times are tough out there, man. The world is a very expensive place, but there are NFT platforms where you can trial minting stuff nearly for free. Litho.xyz, which is based on the CENNZnet, is one of them. There are many others, I think when an artist, regardless of their financial situation, has a little bit of time to devote to something and has the curiosity, the avenues that can open up to a new market, that's worth taking the time.
Okay, I know you've just been given the 5 minutes, but I am going to wrap this up. You know what? We've just joined this community in K Road, but New Zealand is actually world class on the Web3 stage. You have people that you can reach out to, and like Phil said, we can help you with minting for free. Just not, and again for the experimentation. So it's not like you have to go and seek out these people overseas who are experts. we're down the road, and I love to talk blockchain. I love to help people with it. I like to set up people's digital wallet because I feel like I'm giving back. So if anyone at any yeah, exactly, reach out to us on LinkedIn, because I would be happily come and chat to you over a coffee and answer some questions and help you with bits and pieces.
Yeah, very good. I actually think, Nicole, that is a really great way to finish it. I actually, because it's a very, I think Web3 has got a whole lot of opportunity, can be quite polarizing to different sections of people, but I think that's this brings it back to this overarching theme of this whole 2 days, right, is that we are this music tech kind of community that is clustered around K Road now, and this is the opportunity for us all to be coming together. We've got new neighbours in the hood, and those intersections, those relationships, we can innovate and learn and experiment together, and I think that's a really positive way to finish it. I don't want to say anything more. I think you just nailed it. So we're probably a bit short on time to actually take any questions from the audience here, because we're going to move on to our next session shortly, but we're inviting all our panellists to hang around if they're keen, and I'm sure if any of you would like to chat to them afterwards, they'd be more than happy to talk. But just can we just give all four of you, thank you so much. Great conversation, and thanks for joining us.